Hi, I'm Hayley Victoria and welcome back to my Crime and Policing channel. In today's session, we're going to be looking further into murder investigations. And this time, we're going a little bit off-piste. And that's because I want to start forming the whole picture of when we start looking at what we convict people for and how we do that. When we're looking at criminal liability, we'll look at two factors, which is your mens rea and your actus reus. They're Latin words and Latin phrases, so mens rea is your guilty mindset. Your actus reus is the guilty act itself. With both of those combined, it's better for us to be able to prove criminal liability. You might not think I could speak Latin, did you? Well, Benny Possum, so there. So anyway, yeah, guilty act, guilty mind, both of those things, criminal liability. When we're looking at diminished responsibility, what we're going to be looking at today, that's when we're kind of excluding that mens rea. So we're looking at Section 2 of the Homicide Act 1957, and that's all about diminished responsibility. Diminished responsibility is for the defence to prove, not the prosecution. So defence barristers have to prove that, the person they're defending, obviously, hasn't got the mental capacity or the mental functioning skill set that they need to have been party to that crime. And let me explain that. I'm going to read it properly from the legislation because I want to make sure if you are studying policing, I give you the whole shtick. So it's legislation.gov.uk, and I would recommend that if you're looking at crimes and legislations, you always cross-check on that because any updates and stuff will be on legislation.gov.uk. It's all current, and it's just a great place, just one-stop shop to find it. So persons suffering from diminished responsibility is a person who kills or is party to the killing of another. They're not to be convicted of murder if they're suffering from an abnormality of mental functioning, which arose from a recognised medical condition, substantially impaired their ability to do one or more of the things here. So they are to understand the nature of the conduct, to form a rational judgment, to exercise self-control, to provide an explanation for their acts and omissions in doing or being party to the killing. So omitting, the omission is not acting where you could have acted, maybe to stop someone else doing something or to save someone's life or to just not kill someone. Anyway, so as I've mentioned, it's for the defence to prove, when you're on a charge of murder, the defence to prove that they have not been liable to that. And we're looking at diminished responsibility now. So if they are found guilty of being involved in that because of their diminished responsibility, you'll be looking at manslaughter, not murder, which is different when we're looking at charging. And also we start looking at where we're going to house that person. Are they going to go into a secure mental health facility or are they going to go into a regular prison? And that all depends on what we find out at court. So I'm going to jump back in time as usual. This time I'm going to 1889 in France. I love France, by the way. Not just because it's a beautiful country, but because of the developments of forensic science and criminology that have come from France. I mean, hello, Edmond Locard, my favourite. So we're going back to France, and that's when the first case that I've come across where diminished responsibility has helped someone to walk free. Interesting, right? Well, let me give you a bit of background. So send yourself back in time, 1889, to Paris in France. A nice July day, July 26, 1889, and a nice little Parisian cafe. There, our victim, Toussaint Augustin Gouffé, was there at the cafe. And he bumped into an acquaintance, Gabrielle Bompard. So, Gabrielle Bompard was a petite Parisian lady, so she's about 4'8", and I'm like 5'9", so she's much shorter than me. 4'8", petite. Apparently she was quite nice. She's a merchant's daughter, quite nice, but a bit confusing, people said. And I don't think she had a very happy home life, and she was known for being a bit debauched. So what does that mean when you translate it into modern day language? So Gabrielle Bompard had got a fella, and she was his mistress actually, and this is Michel Erod. So Michel was a bit of a bad egg actually, and the pair of them were known as swindlers. And Michel was a bit of a bad egg. He'd actually got married when he was quite young, about 19, and he'd abandoned that marriage, deciding it wasn't for him, and he wanted a life of adventure. So off he goes to the French military. where for a while he does quite well until he packs that in too and decides to go on a career of crime, actually getting involved in fraud and things like that. And that's where he meets Gabrielle Bompard. So these two, you know, they're in a relationship together, they've got a flat together. And then one day, as I mentioned, Gabrielle bumps into our victim, Toussaint Augustin, in a cafe, a lovely Parisian cafe. So as they knew each other, and she's quite a flirty lady, and she's a good-looking girl, you know, and she chats him up, she's flirting with him, and she gets him to come back to her flat. So she's like, yeah, come upstairs, Michelle's not in. I don't know if that's exactly what she said, but that's what I'm picturing in my mind. So off they go upstairs. So a little bit about Toussaint Augustin is he's not a swindler. He's a nice guy. So he's known as a respectable gentleman. He's like 49 years old. He's a widower. He's got 2 daughters who he's supporting. And he has made friends with these people for whatever means. He is, however, known as being a little bit of a ladies' man. So maybe that's, you know, how they know each other. Who knows, right? It's a long time ago. Way before I was born this time. So he goes back to this flat with Gabrielle, and she's seducing him, she's flirting with him, and she gets him to sit down in this deck chair. Not even a deck chair in your flat, I don't know. So she's sitting in this deck chair, and then she whips out this like dressing gown robe. I don't know what she's doing. She's like pulling it around his neck, as you do, I guess, if you're doing a weird dressing gown dance. And then from behind the curtain where the deck chair is aligned, her partner, Michelle A-Rod, jumps out and like starts garroting him with this dressing gown robe. And like Toussaint Augustin is like, nah, get off, mate. And he's resisting this. Of course he would, right? He's fighting for his life. With this panics Michelle, and he jumps around from behind the curtain and he strangles him with his hands. And then he's dead. And then we've got our scene. So our initial scene, we've got Gabrielle Bompard, her partner Michelle A-Rod, and our victim now, Toussaint Augustin Gouffé. They're all 3 of them are here now. Body, suspects in this scene. Oh dear. And they murdered him for money, guys, right? Didn't even have any on him. Yeah, wounded. What a waste of time that was. So they need to get rid of this body, right? They put him in this big trunk and they mail him from Paris to Lyon, to the train station in Lyon. There they collect this big bulky parcel, obviously, weighing 105 kilograms, by the way. I don't know if that's the wood or the guy, I'm not fat shaming. And they put this into their automobile, the car that they've just rented. And they're like travelling down the road. And after a while, right, it's summer, it starts to smell. Because as bodies petrify and stuff, as they decompose, they do start to smell. And obviously it's not been preserved in any way. I mean, you just put them in this like oilskin bag inside a trunk. It's not been preserved. And it starts to smell, and you think, you know, we can't do this, it's heavy, can't afford to keep running the car like this, and it stinks. So they abandon it at the side of the road to get rid of him, and they get rid of the trunk, and they're off. And then they travel through Marseille, London, New York, Canada, San Francisco. They're on this like world tour of like, what have we done tour. So anyway, a few days later, somebody notices the smell, and they're like, what is that smell? Look under a bush, and there they find this oilskin bag, and inside it they find our victim. And obviously the authorities are called. A couple of days later they also find the trunk. Now then, with the victim's body, it took about 5 days for Dr. Alessandre Lacassange to do his post-mortem. And then on this he discovered like an existing injury to the back. And they got a hair as well, which they matched to a comb of the suspect when they looked at the missing persons report. It was practiced back then to note of any like medical injuries and stuff like that to help you to, you know, identify people, which I think is pretty cool, right? Anyway, so they find out who the suspect is, they identify him. We know that this is Toussaint Augustin Gouffé. So our investigation starts. They know that he is friends with this pair of swindlers, right? And they obviously we found the trunk as well. On the trunk, there's a tag, like a luggage tag, that's been left from its passage from Paris to Lyon. The tag is still on there. Error. So when they found out where it's come from, they also identify the maker of the trunk, which is a trunk maker in London. And he identifies who he sold it to. I mean, this is not the days of Argos, right? Where you just bought the same luggage that everybody else has got on their EasyJet flight or Ryanair or whatever it is you get, probably something a bit more highbrow than me. And yeah, so it's quite specialist stuff. It's not even cheap, right? Anyway, they identify it, and he says, I sold it to these 2 people. So when they come back to France, they're arrested. So Gabrielle Papard, and then eventually Michelle Erard are arrested. Oh dear. So this is when it gets really interesting. So Michelle Erard is like, oh yeah, Gabrielle did it. Gabrielle's like 4'8" and very sly, right? And, you know, the victim's quite a big guy. She couldn't have done that, really. I mean, she might be an accessory like we think, but he was blaming it all on her. Now, her defence was saying that she'd been hypnotised. She'd been hypnotised by Michelle Erard. And back in those days, that was like quite a bit of a phenomenon, you know, hypnotising people, mind control, all this kind of stuff. And she really played off on that. And when going into court and stuff, she got like a bit of a following, like admirers blowing her kisses, flowing her flowers and stuff. Like she was some celebrity at the time. It was crazy. Anyway, so in court, the trial begins and everything. Like I said, he's blaming her. They're saying she's been hypnotised by this guy. She's controlled by him. She's only a frail, weak female. She couldn't have possibly done all this. He's tricking her into doing this. He's got a criminal history, this guy, you know. She's been tricked into doing it all. And guess what? The jury find him guilty. So Michelle Erard, he gets the guillotine, which is where you'd lay like this and somebody chop your head off. He gets the guillotine. It's different in France than it would be in England. We didn't have the guillotine over here. We had hanging. So yeah, guillotine, chopped his head off. However, she walks free because of diminished responsibility. Because her defence had argued she got diminished responsibility due to the fact she'd been hypnotised, she was released. How crazy is that, right? Then she carried on dancing and stuff as she did before, disappeared into obscurity and died in like 1920. But yeah, that's the first case I found where diminished responsibility has played a key part in defence. So remember, we're looking at your actus reus and your mens rea. So your mens rea is your guilty mindset. Your actus reus is your guilty act. Hope that makes sense. But yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I hope you do too. And I'll see you next time. Stay safe, don't commit any crimes, and thank you for watching. Bye.